My turn. My turn. My turn. Here's my question, and I'm just like can't wait to play with this one because it's something that happens all the time, and I'm wildly curious about unpacking it with you. Here's the question. Why is something I've been trying to say finally get heard when someone else says it?
Oh my gosh, you've been packing this one away. Why is something I have to say finally heard when someone else says it? One of the first things that comes to mind here is we often worry or fear what other people will think of us when we present something, when we come up with a new idea, something that might be a little bit polarizing or that might be outside of the identity that we've created for ourselves. And so, a lot of the times, when something that we've been wanting to say doesn't align with who we are or what we think other people think about us, we're afraid to say it. We're afraid to express it because we go back to what if they don't accept me? What if I am outcasted? What if, this is actually something great and people love it? And then now I'm held to this standard and I can't meet that.
Hmm.
So, a lot of the time, we tend to mute ourselves and silence ourselves out of fear of something that usually never actually manifests. And when someone else says it, it's outside of us. It has nothing to do with us. That is all them. And even though we might agree with that, or that is something that we have been trying to express, that buffer between us and them is a safety buffer that then, allows us to hear it in a different way or other people to hear it in a different way. So, a lot of it for me comes back to this feeling of needing to be safe, being afraid to take risks, and rather staying within the bounds of who we say we are, who people think we are, or the person that we've shown we are in the past.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm interested to hear that is just my first general foundational, I think, when we create this story of worst case scenario of what will happen, we tend to mute and silence ourselves. But when somebody else says it, it's outside of us and therefore isn't as much of a threat to us. And so it's easier to be heard or understood.
So let me add a little subtle ripple.
Yes.
This isn't something someone's not said. They've said it 100 times, but it doesn't
Okay.
get heard until somebody else says it.
I see what you're saying. So
Yeah,
you're
it's not from of withholding. So let me give you
okay.
an experience, and I get this reflection back all the time. As a facilitator, I am that third safe space, which and this is why people pay me, is I can say the thing that no one else can say. But often after facilitating a session, I'll have people come up to me and be like, "Oh man, I've been saying this for so long, and finally they heard it from you." And I always hear that all the time, and I hear others reflect on that. Like, you bring in somebody from the outside, and all of a sudden they say the same thing, and it finally lands. That's the kind of nuance to the phenomenon I'm talking about.
I gotcha. I gotcha. So it's interesting. See, there we even had two completely different interpretations of one question,
So
which is why
it's
I
like it
love,
just played out.
yes, which is why I love doing this, because had we had the same interpretation of that question, we wouldn't have ever addressed the other portion of it. And the two pieces of it are both very relatable. The fear of saying something, but then, when someone else says it, you can hear it in a different light or in a different perspective, realize it's not that scary. That then gives you confidence in the future, whatever. But the context that you're talking about here with, no, it's actually been said. And I have repeated it. And, like you just said, in the workforce, this happens all the time. I've been saying this idea for weeks and weeks and weeks, but then someone else says it and boom, everybody hears it and thinks it's a great idea. I, from that perspective and that lens that you're coming from, it's not because the idea has changed. Same idea, it's the same proposal. It's the context that has changed. I think
Mm,
something a
yeah.
lot of people don't understand about our brains is we don't process information objectively. We don't just hear a fact or hear an opinion, and no matter who it's coming from, we process it the same. That does not happen. Context very much matters. Our brains are not objective. And I think that's something a lot of people have um, a lack of understanding in. They think that everything that they are experiencing, everything that they are perceiving is truth. That's what most people believe. But the truth is, our brain is programmed by so many things that we don't realize. Traumas from our childhood, how our parents raised us, things that we have experienced, things that we have not experienced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in this context, when somebody else that maybe has more credibility, or somebody else that people naturally trust more, or somebody that might be a little bit more popular, or somebody that has been somewhere longer, has more of a veteran status, like subconsciously, we are going to want to listen to that person opposed to somebody that may not have those things. So I think at the end of the day, that's where it comes from. Another part of it, I think, is this novelty effect that we can kind of play around with. So if something is continually coming from one source, so I've been beating a dead horse, I've been giving this idea over and over and over again. It's not being heard. Nobody's listening to me. I say it, they roll their eyes, whatever, whatever. And then all of a sudden it comes from somebody else. It's new, it's different.
Mm,
Your brain is wired to notice things that are new, not things that have happened a million times, because that is processed in the subconscious. You've been through that, you've experienced it before. We know what to do, we ignore it. But when it comes from somebody else, or the context is slightly different, or somebody up on a stage with lights in the background, flashing and everything, that's new, it's shiny, it's novel. We're going to pay attention to it more.
yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious, as I think about things that could be contributing to this phenomenon, one of the things would be the organizational readiness to hear it. And so, what for me that suggests is um, the the organization itself sort of needs to exhaust its familiar ideas with
Mm-hmm.
not the effect they're looking for to maybe finally hear something that it couldn't hear before. So is the organization ready to receive what's being said, and to the degree in which this thing that's trying to be said out flies outside of what the willingness is to hear it, that there needs to be almost to a point of the circumstances have changed in a way in which the things we're trying aren't working
Mm-hmm.
enough to say we need to open that aperture back up to invite new things that don't necessarily fit our experience. So that's one dimension. Another dimension is um, the that could get in the way, and I'm curious about your take on this, is um, the story in which we hold the speaker or the sayer, right? So there's the one doing the saying, and our receptivity to that person can be limited based on the story in which we hold that person. And so that could change, right? Like, how much do we know we're all inside this thing? And then you hear a quasi expert on a stage say it, we hold them in a different light, which increases the receptivity to what's being said. Um, and then the third thing maybe is, especially when it comes to people we're familiar with, is our experience of the sayer.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we have experience of a sayer, that may lock us into, like, I'll say it this way, there they go again, right? I also find like a phenomenon where the more the sayer is saying, including that idea, the less we'll hear the things they're saying. Meaning, like, if like I show up to the meeting and it's just I'm coming with like a litany of all the things we're doing wrong, then oh, there he goes again. and then I've already shut down my listening for anything in there that I'm going to hear because it's sort of like, well, there's Brent doing Brent, and I'm sick of hearing it, kind of thing. So let me just pause there. I'm curious about your take on any of those things I'm observing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you poked at something interesting there with your last point of sometimes the more somebody has to say, the less likely you are to hear, which is ironic, right? Because if you would think, when somebody has a lot to say, that all of that is going to be properly transcribed and just naturally comparing A to B. When somebody has more to say, there's more to be able to listen to. When somebody has less to say, there's less to be able to listen to. But it's kind of goes back to that old metaphor of, and it's escaping me right now, mom brain. But when somebody is typically quiet and they say very little, that's actually when everyone turns their ears on, which is really true in this case. And the reason is because kind of what I said with that point on novelty. When you can predict somebody's experience, what somebody's going to do, what somebody's going to say, their personality, how they approach conflict. That they always place blame, or they only look at the negative and they're just reading off their points of all of the negative. You're going to be able to predict what they're going to do. And so again, that processing happens in the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is always listening, but it's not active listening. You're not fully engaged. You're not fully present. You're not activating the prefrontal cortex like you should. You're probably not going to be able to consolidate those memories as much because your attention is turned off, and your attention is the very first step into being able to consolidate memory and information and take it back with you. So when you can predict what somebody's going to say, because they always have a lot to say and it goes in this exact pattern, you're a lot less likely to hear it, to listen to it, because your brain is predicting subconsciously what's going to happen. Opposed to somebody that, doesn't speak up often, or, only brings forth credible, good, exciting, novel ideas and doesn't fill in with a bunch of fluff. You're much more likely to listen to them because you can't predict it. You're not sure what they're going to say. You're
Mm.
excited about it. And so your brain is clicked on. Your prefrontal cortex is active. You have to pay attention so you don't miss it, because it is unfamiliar and it is unpredictable. When you're activating your prefrontal cortex and, paying attention, you're able to consolidate those memories, or able to really ingrain it. And then later on, your brain will subconsciously process that. And then maybe like when you're in the shower or when you're going for a walk without music, you'll be able to start iterating on some of those ideas. So that's kind of like the difference there. And it makes total sense, right, from a neuroscience perspective, because you're using different parts of the brain. One is redundant, familiar, predictable. That's the one you're not going to hear, you're not going to listen to. And one is novel, it's exciting, it's uncommon, it's unpredictable. That's the one you are going to pay attention to because you've not experienced it before. And your brain is literally wired to pay attention to new things, again, out of a threat response, a survival mechanism, because if it's new, it could potentially threaten us, or it could potentially, help us thrive. So let's pay attention to what's new because we're not sure where it's going to go.
It's interesting. I experimented with something that I got clear about after I experimented with it. Like I did it intuitively and then like, oh, that was actually on purpose. So I was delivering this workshop and I left. So there's a break in the middle, and what I had gained was deep interest in what I was talking about and playing, and we were playing with it together. But before the break, I left them with nothing about where the hell is this going? And I just left it that way. And so they wandered off, went to the bathroom, whatever, and came back in. And my host was remarking afterwards. He's like, "Yeah, I noticed midway through, people are kind of scratching their heads, going, what is happening, and where's this all going?" What I noticed in part two was the depth of engagement with what came next that they didn't see coming. And it was kind of like, whoa, right? And intentionally leaving them in the mystery to just flop around in it and then come back to bring the mystery into some level of clarity, um, which was really cool. And I have some like little tricks that I do. I'm curious your take on them. And the philosophy is this: if you want things to really be, if you want people to pay attention, then present familiar things in unfamiliar ways.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of the work that I do has to do with the temporality of listening, like listening in time. Are we listening from the past, from the future, from the present? And typically, even visually, we see naturally that the past is on the left and the future's on the right. Especially in North America, we have that sort of linear alphabet, and that's sort of the construct we're familiar with. But when I diagram past versus future, I flip it, and I have future on the left and past on the right. And often I get people asking me, "Hey, was that a mistake?" And I'm like, based on what you know about me, do you think that's a mistake? They're like, no. I'm like, yeah, it's an intentional way to change things up so that we see familiar things in all new again. And even asking the question, why did you do it that way, tells me they were paying attention, and it was, I would say,
Right.
bothering them enough that they stayed awake in the conversation.
Yeah. Brilliant. First of all, are you sure you like didn't study neuroscience in a past life? Because like the things you're doing and like intuitively doing, it's brilliant and it makes total sense. And that's why I love our conversations, because you have the like real world experience, and then I get to like fill in the gaps of like, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. So I want to touch on the one where you kind of left the story open, and you intentionally left that open, and people broke out for a little bit, and then they came back and you realized like the engagement was higher, their curiosity expanded, etc. What you're doing there, and then I'll come back to touch on unfamiliar or presenting familiar things in unfamiliar ways. But what you did in that first part by leaving the story wide open, not, finishing it, was you created an open loop. And I know when
Mm.
we met back in April at that conference at MIT, we talked a little bit about the open loop. And it's it's a psychological phenomenon where your brain becomes motivated to seek something when it feels incomplete or unresolved or like something is missing. Your brain is wired to go seek an endpoint because your brain hates unfinished loops or stories, or insert element here. So when there's a gap between what you know and what you want to know, there's this tension there that naturally drives your motivation, increases your dopamine to go seek a finish or a resolution. So that's essentially what you're doing. When you're creating an information gap, you're literally fueling curiosity. You're saying to their brain, like, something's not finished here, go close the loop. And people close the loop different ways, right? Based on their past programming, based on what they're curious about, their perception of things. So it's really interesting, and a really silly example of, you know, using the open loop effect to help drive habit behavior is, and I tell people this as a simple, silly example, but we all go to the dentist, and our dentist always, this, I will circle the loop, I promise. I'll close this
So
loop.
you have me now. I'm like, where?
Yeah, way off topic now. So we all go to the dentist, and I don't know about you, but every time I go to the dentist, he goes, "Are you flossing twice a day?" And I'm like, "No." But I created this habit where if I start flossing on one or two teeth, I have to do my whole mouth because I'm creating an open loop. And I'm like, there's no point of doing one or two teeth, and then your brain makes it easier for you to close the loop and do the whole mouth, because you're intentionally, playing on this concept, the psychological phenomenon of creating an open loop. So the hardest part is those first few steps, and then your brain takes care of the rest. And yeah, essentially that's what you're doing. And so that's why when everybody came back into the room, they were curious, they were engaged, they were having side conversations on their own, because you created and engineered intentionally this feeling of, where is this going? How do we get there? I have no idea what's going to happen next. And again, that's another reason why like thriller movies or thriller novels are so exciting, because you're creating this anticipation of something. And when you're anticipating something, your dopamine rises and you are motivated to seek a resolution. So that's kind of the open loop thing there.
The visual as you were talking that came to mind um, comes from Inception, the movie. And if you remember, there's, that you're actually creating the architecture in real time based on your thinking at the time. And what I feel like I did was sort of lead people in on a tour of this architecture that's alien and strange. And then before the break, the drawing hadn't been finished, and everyone's sort of just standing in this unfinished room, and there's nothing but the abyss. And then coming back in, completing the architecture to walk through the room, but with them, with a new understanding. And I know like it's certainly an art form from my perspective, and it can be tricky because if you lose them too soon or abandon them in such a place of of lack of groundedness in that it's going somewhere, you'll lose them. And so it's like carefully, mediating the tension between those two things. I find it's kind of like all calibrated based on the my what I'm listening for is the absorption rate of the room. And so how much of a cliff can I leave them on that they don't just turn around and go home to their safe place? Who does a great job of this? I'm thinking about one of my favorite bands, Radiohead, and at least a couple of their songs in OK Computer. They masterfully build a song to a point of tension that you just can't take it anymore. And you're just like, it's just going and going and going. And then just when you think it's done, it keeps going to the point where you're like, ah, and then finally it gives. And then you're softly landed on this safe melody to just sort of, it's like a net that lovingly captures you after they brought you on a bungee jump that you didn't know there was a net on. And I always appreciated that about Radiohead and their ability to do that. And even songs I've heard 1,000 times, every time, it's just like, you feel your chest
Yeah.
tighten. And it's just like, oh, give me a moment to exhale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's brilliant. And you touched on something so important there with that example, and that's a great example that I didn't think about. I was thinking about movies and books, but yeah, music absolutely can instill that same response and feeling. And the common theme of what you're talking about here is when you're like listening to your audience for how much are they absorbing, or Radiohead with their music, you have to establish this sense of trust and safety and first before you're willing to take them on that ride. If you don't establish that, people, like you said, people are going to abandon the idea, because what's happening is they feel unsafe, they feel unsure, their nervous systems are kind of on edge and they're going to retreat. But if you can establish that feeling of, no, you can trust me, we're going, it's unpredictable, but we're going to a safe place. I've established the foundation. Your nervous system is safe. People are much more likely to take that ride with you and be willing to go on that high and then be gently let down. And so it is so important. And I think that's something that organizations who are really successful do a really good job of, is making sure that they establish a sense of safety within their people, within their
Mm.
company. Um, because in order for innovation to happen, in order for new ideas to be heard, you first have to feel safe. If you do not feel safe, if you do not feel grounded, if you are just completely unwilling to even test the waters, the parts of your brain that are going to be active are not going to allow you to optimize for creativity, productivity, or innovation. Um, so that part is really, really key. And it often is the first step in having success in anything.
Mm.
Uh, it's really important. So I love that example that you just gave, because as you can see, like it applies in entertainment, it applies in family life, it applies in business, literally anywhere. If you want someone to be receptive, to be engaged, to be curious, they first have to feel safe, and their nervous systems have to be able to signal that to their brain so that the right parts of the brain can be active and optimal.
Yeah. 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 I mean, fundamentally, coming from my, performance training, it's good storytelling. If there's not
Yeah.
tension, if there's not mystery and wonder, if there isn't safety to be in the story, even if it's uncomfortable, um, you lose people. And even a lesson I learned, I was giving a speech a couple of months ago, and I told sort of a story that left as a cliffhanger, and then I moved on to the next point, and I never completed the story. I had people come up after, and it's like, so what the hell happened? I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to complete the story. And if we don't complete the story, we'll leave people in that open loop also, and they'll then be just tracking with the open loop instead of where you're going next. And so we run the risk of, we bring someone to that place, we don't complete the story stays open. You've got another point to make, but they won't hear it because they're still wondering about what the hell happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very, it's an art. It very much is an art, because if you don't have the foundation of safety, you lost them right off the bat. But if
Mm,
you have that foundation of safety, but you're only living in the safety, you're going to lose them because it's predictable, and they're not going to pay attention because the subconscious mind is processing, and they're probably ruminating on something else because there's not enough novelty there. Um, but if you have too much novelty and too many open loops, they're not going to hear you because they're, like you just said, they're staying stuck in this open loop. Even though you started 5 other loops over here, they're not going to be able to hear it because they're still stuck on that first one and they
mm,
never got there with you. And I think that brings us all the way back to presenting familiar things in unfamiliar ways, and why that is such a powerful technique, because you are tapping into all the things. When you present familiar things, that is the safety, that is the foundation that we need, that is that element of prediction that allows somebody's brain and nervous system to say, we're good here, we've experienced this before. But in unfamiliar ways, that is that element of novelty and of surprise and of open loops that is going to keep them involved. It's called a prediction error, because our
mm,
brain's constantly trying to predict what comes next. But when it gets it wrong, because it's not experienced it before, your brain lights up and it says, oh, that was new. Pay attention to that. Let's consolidate that into a memory. Let's keep that in mind for next time. Let's learn more about it. So that's what's happening there. And then kind of the artful piece of it is knowing, okay, how many storylines can I create at a time without risking losing them? Because our brains only have so much capacity at once, and they can't track a million things. I mean, we're hit with 11 million bits of information per second, but only 40 to 50 bits actually make it to our conscious awareness, because we don't have full capacity to consciously, pay attention to everything. So what you're doing here is fully aligned with the neuroscience, presenting familiar things in unfamiliar ways. You're literally creating the foundation needed for somebody to hear an old idea by activating the correct parts of their brain so that they can actually be engaged with it. So it
mm.
makes total sense.
I feel inspired. My deep heart for those inside of organizations that they have their finger right on the thing that no one's hearing or saying, and they're failing to get the others to hear. Let me run you through a stunt double model right now just
Yes,
to see what I
let's do it.
miss, right? So, and it's all in the spirit of bringing forward something, building tension, and creating both safety and unfamiliarity. So let's just say an organization has been struggling with a thing and they've tried many things to deal with it, and yet not open to any new ideas. You've got the idea and you know it's going to work, but you can't do it unless people see it too and are willing to engage in it. If I were to coach someone, what I would recommend they do first is to bring the fact that this thing is something that's had a lot of attention of the organization, and that it is worth continuing to pursue because of the business case for its effect on the organization. to walk through in a very loving and appreciative way the various efforts thus far in an attempt to nobly overcome that challenge. Not from hey, you tried this and it didn't work, and you tried, but no, to say, look at all the attempts. Let me go through history a little bit with us all. Say, think of all these things we've tried, and then build to the cliff of, are we yet satisfied with how our attempts have gone? Have they delivered to a point where any of us feel satisfied with those efforts? And leave that space there and let the room respond to, oh yeah, no, it's fine. Or likely what they'll say is, wow, in the way that that was just presented, no, a lot of effort, the results aren't there. And then ask, is it time? Are you ready to explore an alternate way to approach this thing? And just let it be. Now, two things may happen there. One, no, let's end the meeting. But in not saying the thing and just leaving it hanging is going to open up curiosity, and you'll have conversations after the meeting. Wait, what was it you were going to say? The other that will happen is in that tension, the listening is vastly amplified. Being like, what do you mean another approach? Now that I understand all these things we've done nobly haven't gotten us there, maybe I am open to an idea I didn't think I was. Then the space is there to then say the thing. So I'm curious about that model, right? First, let's acknowledge and appreciate the importance of this thing we've been trying. Let's acknowledge and appreciate our noble efforts getting there. Are we satisfied with the results of any of that work so far? Then are we open to something new? Pause and just leave it there.
Yeah. Yeah. That model and approach makes sense to me. So what you're doing in that first step is you're validating what has already happened. You're acknowledging progress, and the brain's going to be more receptive to change or to approaching something in a new way when it feels like, previous effort was acknowledged and validated and confirmed. I think the reason for this is because it creates trust. People don't feel like you're completely dismissing or disregarding the effort that they've put forth. And then you're creating this sense of value. You're saying that we've worked really hard, but we have a next evolution to hit. We have a next progress point. We have something to help us keep moving forward. It's not just, an empty road leading nowhere. So I think that point of validation and acknowledgement is extremely important. Again, it helps us to always going back to feeling safe. A brain that is afraid or alerting to threat is not going to be a brain that's ever receptive to change, because it always already feels like it's in this tumultuous situation and it's panicking and it's not sure. So that point of validating and acknowledging is a really, really first important step. So hit the nail on the head with that one. And then creating this tension with the question of, are we satisfied with where we are? And allowing there to be space there is important, because without the space, and we always come back to creating space, without that sense of space, there's no opportunity for new things to surface. So asking that question, getting people to ponder rather than just going on autopilot where they've always been, well, we've always done it this way and let's just put our heads down and grind through it. But giving them an opportunity to pick their head up and presenting something in a new way and creating that point of tension, whether they immediately answer or take it back and ponder it in the shower, that space is so incredibly powerful. And the brain will start comparing, okay, where were we in the past? Where are we now? And where do we want to go? And what are the gaps between those few steps? And then people start to engage. They get curious because, again, you're creating that open loop. And people want to know, how do we close that? How do we come to a solution together? So that's kind of how I see it. And it makes total sense again. And you're also making it feel safe by introducing the possibility of another option, which I think is critically important by presenting other options and giving examples of we don't have to always do something the way we've always done it. It is safe to try new things, to be innovative. I am welcoming that. I'm creating the doorway, but not the answer. I'm creating the doorway, but not the answer. I think that's really important to drive curiosity, creativity, and innovation.
Mm. I want you to try something on. And this just occurred to me as a result of our conversation to go back to a quote I have not visited in a long time, but it seems really germane to this. It's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, though there's no facts to support that claim, so we'll just leave it without attribution. Preach the gospel and use words if you have to.
That's brilliant. Yeah. That makes you think. Preach the gospel and use words if you have to. To me, that means obviously going out there and doing the thing, not saying the thing, but, living with action, not words. And I think that's kind of circles us all the way back to what we were just talking about of, creating an opportunity to show, to demonstrate. And it's very easy for us to not do that. It's very easy for us to always lead with the answer, or you should do XYZ in order to achieve XYZ. But when we create space, when we lead with a question, that naturally creates space that makes people wanting to find an answer and a solution that much more natural. So with this quote you just said, preach the gospel and use words if necessary. We're kind of playing on some of the same principles here of demonstrating and creating curiosity in others by not directly communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it, but showing it or expressing it through your actions. People start to wonder, what's their story? How did they get there? Why do they do what they do? And then at that point, you might use your words to close the loop for them. But
Mm,
I find when we don't make things obvious, people are a lot more drawn because it makes them curious. So that's
yeah.
kind of the way that I see that quote that you just gave is preach the gospel and use words if necessary. You're not making it obvious, and therefore you're attracting people to wonder what your story is. Where did you come from? Why do you do it this way? And then at that point, you have them locked in, and you can really start to, influence.
There's a um, I don't know why today this conversation is bringing back so many memories from my past, but whatever, for whatever reason it is. Um, Maybe it's a recognition of something that's been there that I've forgotten in a little while. So I was involved in the scouting program for a long time, both as a scout myself and then as a scout leader. And one of the things that's so wonderful about that program is the sort of theatrics and the skits and the songs and all these rituals, and it just really is really powerful. But it reminds me of one of my favorite skits, which is really, really simple. So, here we all are, there's a big campfire, there's 100 scouts, and, somebody's performing a skit. And one person wanders onto the stage, and when I say stage, I mean they're just in a hill in the woods, and it's usually dark at this time. And they just stand there looking up. And then all of a sudden, somebody else wanders over, and they just come over, and they like start looking up. And there's, let's say 5 or 6 scouts, they're all just standing there staring up. And finally, one of them asks, "What do you see up there?" And of course, the punchline is, "Nothing. My neck hurts."
Oh gosh, that is funny.
It's so good. It just plays out every time because we can't help ourselves.
We
So,
can't.
I
No.
thought about that skit when I think about this quote is like, what does it mean to demonstrate it and cause
Yeah.
curiosity without a
Yeah.
single word uttered?
Yeah. That's the perfect practical example of that. And it took me some talking and like iterating and thinking in my head to think like, what does this actually mean to me? Not the obvious of, no. And part of it is the obvious. Part of it is, show with your actions, not with your words, do unto others as you would want to have done unto you. But really, like that next deeper level is what you just explained. And I think what I was coming to the realization as I was continuing to iterate and talk on it was don't make it obvious. Make people be curious and say, where did that
Ooh,
come? What are you doing?
I'm
When we
writing that
make
down. I'm writing that down. That's good. Don't make it obvious. Make it curious
make it curious, yeah,
first.
because yeah, exactly. Because then we're tapping on everything we have already said, throughout this podcast so far of we need to create that element of novelty in a way that it feels safe and feels approachable and accessible. Um, and that element will then drive the curiosity. It will get people to listen. It will allow, circling all the way back to our first question, allow people to hear what we've always been saying because we're opening that loop. We're making them curious. And so your example just there of everybody staring up at the sky, it's like, what's going on? I don't see anything. There's nothing obvious here to me. What do they see that I don't see? Oh my gosh, I can't wait to figure out what it is. And then, it's just funny that it was his neck that hurt. But it's the same concept, right? Of make it, don't make it obvious, make it curious. And yeah, it's brilliant. My fiance and I were in Hilton Head a few weeks ago, and um, we were walking out to the beach. And on the way out to the beach, there was all of these like greenery and shrubs and palms and pines and southern pines. And there was somebody up on like maybe the third level of one of the condos overlooking the beach. And we are walking out and he kind of like waves to us and we're like, don't know you. Okay, hello. And he's like, no, 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 like turn around. So he tells us to turn around and we're like looking and looking and looking. And he created this gap of like curiosity, right? He's clearly looking at something. It wasn't obvious to us. And so now we're like, what is it? What is he showing us? We are so excited. We didn't see it. And then we saw a massive, massive buck with like a 10 point.
Wow.
Um, yeah, just like doing its thing, rummaging for berries and things. And so we stop and we look, and then people who are walking past us on the path saw us staring and looking. So they stopped and looked and they didn't see it. And it was like a domino effect. And then everyone just kept stopping to look, and it wasn't obvious at first, but everybody stopped because we created that sense of curiosity without the obvious. And so everyone's like, what am I missing? Like, I need to close this loop. Something's happening here, and everybody else notices it, and I don't. And so it's like a really interesting phenomenon, and a really interesting like experiment to study in people too. But yeah, it's fascinating.
It's so funny. Like, I was just thinking about, so it just occurred to me now. I realized that all of the skits in the scouting program are dad jokes under development.
Love a dad joke. Let's hear another one.
And like practice to be good at dad jokes one day.
Yeah. Oh,
Because every one of them ends with like a, oh, really?
yeah. Oh, I love
Oh
it.
man. I was thinking about like, okay, playing around with this idea of how do we create a space of safety through appreciation of what it is, what we've been up to, no matter what, opening up the question to respond to, has it satisfied us or are we still unsatisfied with the situation? Um, Letting the room respond,
Mhm.
asking then, are we open for a different view? Leaving the tension. Um, and if you want to be a real son of a bitch about it, do this on a Friday at 4 and then just be like, oh, gotta go and take off. Leave the loop for the weekend.
Yeah.
Oof,
I,
that's cruel and
I was going to
cool.
say that is both brilliant and like devilish because if you're like me and you're naturally you're going to be ruminating all
All
weekend
weekend.
trying to close that loop or figure out what did they mean by that or how can I come up with a solution or how do I see this? And yeah, I would be spinning on that all weekend long. But if you're, if you're trying to drive curiosity and change, that is one of the best ways to do it. Our brains are literally wired for that. And I think another really interesting concept here that we can touch on is, when you're actively listening or, you're experiencing that open loop being created, you're pondering, what does that mean? Am I ready to experience it in a new way, et cetera, et cetera? You're actively listening. You're engaging your prefrontal cortex, your working memory is active. Hopefully, your amygdala is pretty calm because you've established that sense of safety. Your anterior cingulate cortex is coming in to monitor conflict. Does this match what we expect? Does it not? And it helps to turn on your salience network, which helps you to shift between the central executive network and the default mode network, which are, two networks of your brain. The central executive network is that active, prefrontal cortex is alive, you're making business decisions, you're actively engaged in trying to solve problems. The salience network is like the switch that helps you toggle, and the default mode network is kind of when you're daydreaming or ruminating or creating your sense of identity, or when you're not just actively involved. But what also you're doing there with the open loop, especially over the weekend when you have tons of space, is you're allowing all networks of the brain to come to the party and to play fluidly together, which is really, really important. So when it's being presented, again, central executive network is live and active, but then you create the space. You're sitting in that space. You're no longer in that work environment. You're no longer on the call. You're at home. You're resting, you're watching TV, you're doing a puzzle, you're taking a shower, you're not actively involved, but in the background, your default mode network is running. You're pondering that, even though you're not consciously aware of it. And your brain is trying to match patterns. Your brain is trying to close those loops. Even though you're not actively involved per se, it's kind of happening in the background. And then you get in the shower and you're like, oh, that's it. Like I got it. That's the way we can approach this, or this is a new way to think about it. How did I not think about this before? And again, it kind of comes back to creating that space, stepping away from it for a little bit, and then you get that like aha moment because your brain is constantly running in the background and you're toggling fluently between all those different networks. So even though that might seem cruel to do that on a 4 o'clock on a Friday, it's also a very brilliant way to do it because you're allowing space for all of the different networks of the brain to do exactly what they're designed to do.
Mm. Well, here's the thing. We love it because otherwise we would never watch a Netflix series.
Exactly. Our brains do. They love it. Our brains, even though, creating open loops or having multiple open tabs, you can think about a laptop, right? My work is crazy. I work in health tech day to day, and I love what I do because it's constantly new and challenging. And I get to work in all these different spaces from, cardio space to brain imaging, everything in between. And I always have a million and one tabs open, and sometimes it slows down my computer. Our brains work the same way. When we have a lot of tabs open and a lot of things going on, it can slow us down. But it's that Goldilocks principle of having enough new, novel, exciting things to keep us motivated, to keep us curious, but not too much to where we get overwhelmed. So it is definitely a like a Goldilocks principle, but exactly the example you just gave with Netflix and like having that thing to look forward to or to be excited about or to try to predict, but you get it wrong and you thought you were going to get it right this time. It's all kind of the same thing.
Hmm. Not that we have time today, but I want to plant a seed around a future conversation, which what does sort of the harmonics and language, how does that play a part in being heard too? And that's a whole rabbit hole. Maybe we go into in another episode, but I just want to throw that out there because that's definitely something I've noticed is how much it does matter, but how the hell do we actually work with that?
It does matter a lot. And I would love to, I know it's supposed to be my turn to come up with a random question, but I think that would be the perfect next thing to talk about because it ties in so well. And that's something that I want to learn more about from you is the power of language, the power of tone, the power of body language. Um, I would love to get into that on the next one. Oh my gosh, we could talk about that for hours, I'm sure.
So let's do that. So take it as an opportunity to form a question that gets to that topic and then surprise me with how we start us
Okay,
off.
we're leaving an open loop. Yep,
Open.
love
Oh shit, we just did it.
it. We did it.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Awesome. Well, let's wrap up here. Yet again, what a joy.
Yeah.
Those of you listening, watching, reading, um, comment, respond, and or if there is a way in which we could be delivering what we're talking about here that would be more valuable, let us know that too. Like what modality of this conversation makes sense. We've got two forms of it. One is this live, unedited, completely hitting the conversation in the moment. And then there's also the thoughtfully produced essays that go along with each episode that you can find on Substack that show in more, high resolution some of the concepts we're talking about, including diagrams. But if there's a preferred way, or like an executive summary, brief version, well, I don't know, whatever that may be, let us know in the comments in any way, and we'll see what we can do to make this as digestible and shareable so that you and those that matter to you can benefit from any of the things that we're talking about. All right, Jules. Well, until the next episode, this has been awesome.
As always, thanks, Brent.